My honor to bring you the message for today and start out with a story. Prior to their immigration to the United States, Albert and Elsa Einstein lived through the severe economic times of post-World War I Germany. And apparently during this time, Elsa would save old letters and old scraps of paper for Albert to write on. Well, years later, Elsa engaged in a public relations tour of American research laboratories. And on this tour, American scientists seeking to impress her explained the latest scientific equipment and developments. Eventually, she was ushered into a high-chambered observatory and shown another huge scientific apparatus. And when she asked, "What's that for?" the scientist in charge proudly responded, "Mrs. Einstein, we use this equipment to probe the deepest secrets of the universe." To which Mrs. Einstein responded, "My husband did that on the back of old envelopes." There have been a lot of great scientists in our world, but only one, Albert Einstein. In 1722, the town council of the city of Leipzig, Germany, was searching for a person to serve as cantor for the school of St. Thomas and also as an organist for the Church of St. Thomas. The council searched for this new person and selected one who, 3 weeks later, turned them down. They then contacted their second choice, and he too turned them down. They decided, as one of the members of the council subsequently wrote, that since the best man could not be obtained, a mediocre one would have to be accepted. The third choice they hired, the mediocre candidate, was Johann Sebastian Bach. Yeah, that poor town council. They had to settle for the greatest composer of church music who ever lived, Johann Sebastian Bach. Charlie Chaplin was visiting the studio of his friend Pablo Picasso. Picasso made a sudden gesture and accidentally spilled some paint on Charlie Chaplin's white pants. Picasso said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Charles. I'll get some spirits and I'll remove it." And Chaplin said, "Please don't." He said, "Just leave the paint where it is on my pants, and then would you please sign my pants?" And Charlie Chaplin later claimed that he owned a Picasso. Imagine what that pair of pants would be worth today, you know? Someone has said that it is much easier to get rich than it is to get famous. And of course, that's true. There are many rich people in this world, but there are relatively few people whose names are universally recognized. There are fewer still whose names are known for generations beyond their death. Johann Sebastian Bach, Albert Einstein, Charlie Chaplin, Pablo Picasso. Names such as these hold a unique place in human history. But there is one name. There is one name that stands absolutely alone, and that name is Jesus of Nazareth. There have been many who have left their imprint on the human enterprise, but only one shattered the wall between life and death: the humble carpenter from Galilee. As someone has said, Jesus had no servants, yet they called him master. He had no degree, yet they called him teacher. He had no medicines, but they called him healer. He had no army, yet kings feared him. He won no military battles, yet he conquered the world. He committed no crime, yet they crucified him. He was buried in a tomb, and yet he lives today. You know, because of those lonely hours that Jesus spent on the cross, we sometimes forget just how popular he was when he first began his ministry. Now, the scene we have in our lesson for today takes place at the house of Simon Peter, where Jesus heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Now, some cynic has said that Simon Peter probably regarded this miracle with mixed feelings. You guys are slow this morning. But notice what Mark tells us next. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who were sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door. Now think of that. The whole town gathered at the door. Now imagine what it would be like if even part of all of Des Moines gathered in one place simultaneously. But everyone there, what? Wanted to see Jesus. A little further on we read, very early in the morning while it was still dark. I love this part. Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is searching for you." Now, I don't know how to say this without it sounding like a platitude or a cliche, but I really do believe that deep down, all people everywhere are searching for Jesus. Now, they may not know his name, and they might use religious symbols and terminology that are different from what you and I would use, but they are looking for Christ all the same. I read recently about a woman named Laura. Laura first attended Mass at age 5. Her mother had just recently become a Roman Catholic. And when Laura inquired about the church, her mom said, "Well, this is where Jesus lives. This is where Jesus lives." So at the end of the service, Laura said, "I want to see Jesus." Her mother tried to explain that Jesus was there in spirit, but not in body, but little 5-year-old Laura didn't get it. Finally, her mom said, "Well, that's enough, Laura. Let's go home now." And Laura resisted. Mom insisted. And then Laura bolted across the aisle and bear-hugged a marble post and yelled out for all to hear, "I'm not leaving until I see Jesus." Her mother was kind of humiliated. And the more she asserted, the more louder Laura protested. Finally, the priest came over, and he bent down and he took Laura's hand, and he gently led her to the altar, and he showed her the sacraments. And after a couple of minutes, Laura returned happily to her mom, content to go home. Well, that was 20 years ago. Today, people who know her call Laura by her proper name, Sister Laura. She became a nun. Yeah. And she did well in school, and she's thrived as an excellent servant of others. I guess we'd have to concede that somehow in the sacrament, that day, long ago, little Laura saw Jesus. I personally believe that everyone is looking for Jesus in his or her own way. And now I'm going to repeat what Dan just said. It was French mathematician and physicist and philosopher Blaise Pascal who said we have a God-shaped void within our souls. Now, we may try to fill it with all kinds of inappropriate and inefficient substitutes, power, wealth, sex, drugs, but nothing on this earth can suffice. St. Augustine said it so beautifully when he said, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." All people everywhere need what only Jesus Christ can offer them. For one thing, Christ showed us how to look at God. What is God like? God is like Jesus. Is God a personal God? Yes. Is God a loving God? Yes. Is God responsive to our needs? Yes. How do we know? Jesus. In his person, in his teachings, Jesus shows us everything we need to know about God. Everything. A little girl was once confronted with some of the savage and bloodthirsty parts of the Old Testament. That was not a huge problem for her, however. Her comment was, "But that all happened before God became a Christian." Now, her theology may not be all that sophisticated, but she's not that far off. Jesus gave us a clearer picture of what God is like than the Old Testament writers possibly could. One of William J. Locke's novels, there is a wealthy woman who has spent half a lifetime on a tour of the great sights of the world, and she is weary and bored. Then she meets a Frenchman who has very little of this world's goods, but who has a wide knowledge and a great love of beauty. He comes with her on her tours, and in his company, things are completely different. I never knew what things were like, she said to him, until you taught me how to look at them. In the same sense, humanity could not know what God was like until Jesus showed us how to look at God. Jesus also taught us how to look at life. How to look at life. How are we to take life? Life with all of its joys and its heartbreaks, life with its mountains and its deep, deep valleys. Well, since it is Super Bowl Sunday, I feel necessary to use a football illustration here. So I recently read about a former NFL football coach, Sam Rutigliano of the Cleveland Browns. It was suggested that I listen to a speech that he gave, and so I did. I assumed he was going to use one of those Jocks for Jesus banquet speeches in which he tells us how Jesus helped him win all these victories, right? Instead, Sam Rutigliano told how he and his wife were driving one evening with their little 2-year-old daughter in the back seat of the car. There was a terrible accident. The car rolled over, and their daughter was trapped underneath the car. Now, I figured he would tell some miracle story about how God somehow saved their daughter. Instead, he simply said, she was dead. Rutigliano then went on to tell how he and his wife grieved so deeply over the death of their little girl. It was an awful time for them, the most difficult time in their marriage. Time went on. They got pregnant again, finally, an answer to prayer. And that baby was about to be delivered, and it was stillborn. It was too much for them to take, too much to handle, too much to grieve. And as time went by, Sam Rutigliano started to negotiate with God. You know, God, if you bless us with another baby, we'll give our lives to you and we'll dedicate the child to you. And if you give us a healthy child, we'll be yours and we'll do whatever you want us to do with our lives. If you, and a quiet voice came back and spoke to Sam's heart and simply said, no deals, Sam. No deals. I rule over you in all times of life. In the good and in the bad. Sam Rutigliano went on to say, God has given me and called me to be his servant in my turf, the National Football League. He rules over all aspects of my life, when winning or losing, in triumphs and tragedies. How about you? Where is your turf? Does God rule in your turf there, in your situation? Not just when you're winning, but when you're losing as well? Not just during the triumphs, but during the tragedies of your life. Does God rule then too? You see, here is a professional football coach who has learned to look at life through the eyes of Jesus. No easy answers. The rain falls on the just and the unjust, but still we can trust God. Don't let the prosperity preachers sell you a bill of goods. Following Christ will not guarantee a happy marriage, healthy children, or a fat bank account. Following Christ will guarantee that you are in alignment with God's purpose for your life, and will guarantee that neither life nor death nor anything in all creation will be able to separate you from the love of God. Christ taught us how to look at God. He taught us how to look at life, and he taught us how to look at one another. We are the people of the cross. That's who we are. We're people of the cross. Christ showed us how to live sacrificially in service to one another. There's a story told by the grandfather of a 9-year-old boy named Mark. Mark's mother received a phone call one day. Excuse me, I lost my place here. So Mark's mother received a phone call one day in the middle of the afternoon. It was the teacher from her son's school. Mrs. Smith, something unusual happened today in your son's third grade class. Your son did something that surprised me so much, I thought you should know about it immediately. The mother began to get a little worried. Teacher continued, nothing like this has happened in all my years of teaching. This morning, I was teaching the class a lesson on creative writing. And as I always do, I tell the story of the ant and the grasshopper. Okay? The ant works hard all summer and stores up plenty of food, but the grasshopper plays all summer and does no work. Then winter comes, the grasshopper begins to starve because he has no food. So he begins to beg, please, Mr. Ant, you have so much food, please let me eat too. And then I say to the boys and girls, your job is to write the ending to the story. Your son Mark raised his hand. Teacher, may I draw a picture? Well, yes, Mark, if you like, you may draw a picture, but first, you need to write the ending to the story. As in all years past, most of the students said that the ant shared his food with the grasshopper, and they both lived through the winter. Both the ant and the grasshopper lived. A few children wrote, no, Mr. Grasshopper, you haven't worked all summer, and now I have just enough food for myself. So the ant lived, and the grasshopper died. But your son ended the story in a way different from any other child ever. He wrote, so the ant gave all of his food to the grasshopper. The grasshopper lived through the winter, but the ant died. And the picture? At the bottom of the page, Mark had drawn 3 crosses. This is the gospel at its most profound level. We are people of the cross. Christ died for us. We are to live for him and for one another. When you understand that, life takes on a whole new meaning and a new sense of purpose. Christ showed us how to look at God, how to look at life, and how to look at one another. Christ gave his life for us, and we are to give our lives in loving service to one another. That's the meaning of life. That's what it's all about. And living the Christ life will bring you a joy that the world simply cannot know. It's no wonder his disciples said to him, everyone is searching for you. Everyone, deep down, whether they realize it or not, is searching for Jesus of Nazareth. Let's pray. Thanks for watching. I hope this video can further the discussion of your relationship with Christ, either at home or maybe in the comments below.